Hello, my friend. Welcome back. Today, we are diving into one of the most hyped wellness trends of the last decade, intermittent fasting. It is everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, podcasts, books, and depending on who you listen to, it's either the secret to longevity and glowing skin or an absolute hormone-destroying disaster for women. And as always, the truth is far more nuanced. Now, intermittent fasting didn't just come out of nowhere. It has roots in evolution, in ancient cultural practices, and in our own modern research. And yet, despite the enthusiasm, the majority of that research has been done on men, even on mice, male mice, with very little data specific to women. And if there's one thing that I'm going to say over and over in this episode, it's that women's physiology is different. The way our stress hormones, our reproductive hormones, even our thyroid and our metabolic systems communicate means fasting doesn't always land the same way in women as it does in men, and that matters to us. We also know that there's not enough data differentiating even among women. Do you have PCOS? Are you trying to get pregnant? Are you premenopausal? Are you postmenopausal? Do you have metabolic dysfunction? Are you overweight? Are you obese? Are you normal weight? Just looking to improve longevity? These things matter, and the fact is we just don't have enough data. But today I want to walk you through the big picture. I want you to understand how fasting became so popular, the different types of fasting, and what the science shows about all things fasting, autophagy, metabolic health, why men respond differently, and then what the research does and does not tell us about women. We're going to talk about why fasting might be genuinely helpful and when it might be harmful or stressful, what signs to look for, how to approach fasting in a way that supports your hormones rather than working against them. We are diving in. We're going to talk all things intermittent fasting. So I hope you'll find this helpful. By the end of the episode, I'm really hoping you'll feel confident in knowing whether intermittent fasting is a good tool for you to try, how to use it safely, and also how to listen to your body so you can make an empowered choice about your health. Are you ready? Let's jump in. This is a really nuanced conversation, so I'm excited to be able to spend some time really diving into how this really applies to women. So often when we hear things like this talked about with intermittent fasting, we hear it on an Instagram post, or a 30-second post somewhere, or we're hearing about it in the context of people instead of specifically in women. So today we're really going to take a nuanced dive into intermittent fasting, specifically in women. And it's a really interesting story, and I think you're going to really find a lot of value in it. So let's get started. I have reviewed the data around intermittent fasting and different types of time-restricted eating, and I'm going to tell you what I found. First, let's go back. Where did intermittent fasting come from? How did this become a thing? This was back around 2010 to 2015, where it really started to gain a lot of traction. And where it initially started was actually in some observations that researchers found in animal models, specifically in mice, that when mice went through feeding periods and then fasting periods, that they had significant improvements in metabolic markers like cholesterol and diabetes, as well as weight, and then also probably in longevity, although that's extrapolated from some different markers. So one of the words you'll hear a lot with fasting is autophagy, and I'll come back to that in a second. But that's how it originally started, was in animals, where they could really control everything that the animal was eating at the time that they were eating. They saw these really promising results. So because these protocols that were used in animals were focused only on the timing of the eating and not the what that the animals were eating, it was really easy to translate into human models that became very popular on social media and within the weight loss world. So one of the first protocols was time-restricted eating, and I'll go into these definitions in a second, where people fasted for 16 hours of the day and then would eat during an 8-hour window. Another protocol that became very popular was normal eating for 5 days with 2 days of very significant calorie restriction, so almost a fast. What they found were, for some people, they would have significant weight loss. And because they weren't worrying about what they were eating, they didn't have to change their grocery shopping or their meal planning, it was very easy for a lot of people to do. So it kind of exploded, and intermittent fasting became the thing. The biohacker world then really jumped on board, and because of this possibility of longevity, that meant that the animal models were showing that periods of non-eating would stimulate the body to go into a phase of autophagy, meaning cellular turnover. So the body has a natural cycle of breaking down and digesting its own cells and then putting out new cells. And it was found in animals that with periods of fasting, that the cells would go through this better, that it would turn over cells in a better way. And that was really exciting for people. So a lot of people jumped on that bandwagon saying this will improve autophagy and therefore improve longevity, but also all of the things that feed into longevity, like decreasing something called oxidative stress and improving healing and repair of the body. So that's kind of where all of this came from. Now, before I tell you the nuanced part of this, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I want to just go into some of the definitions. Spoiler, at the end, I'm going to tell you how and when this might be a good thing for you to try. So it's worth listening and getting these definitions down because there is a lot of variety here in how you can apply this in your own life and see if it might be a good option for you. The first definition I want to go through is time-restricted eating. The term we hear most is intermittent fasting, and there's a lot of things under intermittent fasting. So time-restricted eating means that you eat during a daily window. For example, eating only between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. would be an example of time-restricted eating, that 16-8 that I talked about earlier, fasting from 6 p.m. to 10 a.m. and then eating from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. So this is not necessarily looking at calorie counting, it's just focusing on what time you eat. Another definition is intermittent fasting. Like I said, this is more of an umbrella term for going through cycles of eating and cycles of not eating. Other methods are cycles of eating and cycles of eating very small amounts of food. So time-restricted eating could be grouped under intermittent fasting in that 16-8. Another definition that I want you to know is 1 meal a day. And that is a form of time-restricted eating and intermittent fasting where you are eating 1 meal and then fasting the rest of the day. Another definition is this 5-2. So that's 2 days a week of a very low calorie diet, typically 500 to 600 calories a day, but you eat normally on the other days of the week. Alternate day fasting is another type of intermittent fasting that has shown up in some of the studies where people will fast every other day, sometimes for 30 hours at a time. So you might eat your regular diet and then stop eating at 6 p.m. or 8 p.m. and then fast the whole 24 hours of the next day and then break your fast the following day and breakfast. So that's alternate day fasting. And then the final definition is fasting mimicking diet. The fasting mimicking diet is using short periods of a very low calorie and low protein, mostly plant-based intake to mimic fasting while allowing some minimal nourishment. So you'll do this for 5 days and then 25 days of eating your regular diet. So like I said, during those 4 or 5 days, you're really mimicking fasting without having to go without food completely for 5 days a week. And these are the types of fasting and intermittent fasting that typically show up in the data that we have and have become popular in social media and other places. So why would people think that this is a good idea? Some of this comes from an evolutionary model, right? If you think about cave women and cavemen, they would have had times when they are feasting, like they kill a buffalo and they eat the whole buffalo or they eat as much as they can, and then periods of famine where maybe you're eating just berries or smaller amounts of food. So the body would have had to adapt to times with food and without food. That would have made sense. Oftentimes we'll hear this talked about as metabolic flexibility. And I want you to remember that idea of metabolic flexibility. Typically when we eat during the day, especially in modern world, we are living off of our carbohydrates. So if I have oatmeal with raspberries for breakfast, then I'm going to use the carbohydrates in the oatmeal and the raspberries to fuel my activity throughout the next few hours. So whether that's activity from my brain of thinking, or whether that's I go for a run, or I'm just sitting here breathing, I'm going to use up that glucose from the carbohydrates that I just ate. Now, when I go into a time where I'm not eating, if I'm still using energy, which that could be, again, thinking or running or breathing or just being alive, if I'm not eating during that time, then the body has to switch. It says, hey, I don't have any carbohydrates here. I don't have any glucose here to use right away. So I'm going to start breaking down my fat stores and break the fat down into ketones to use those for energy. So that's called metabolic flexibility. I think of it like a hybrid car, right? The car can switch from gas to electricity. And likewise, our body should be able to switch from using glucose to using fat as a source of energy. If we have glucose available nonstop all day, every day of the week, then we're never going to be in a state of fat burning. So it's only by having periods of time where we don't have glucose immediately available that we can tap into that fat burning. So we want that metabolic flexibility. We want the body to really quickly be able to shift over into fat burning when we're not eating. One of the theories of where fasting comes from is if I just don't eat anything, then the body has to switch over into a fat burning mode, which from a weight loss perspective is really good. Now, when we switch into that fat burning mode, we also are lowering our insulin and lowering our chronic glucose levels. That improves insulin sensitivity and glycemic control. It decreases the risk of diabetes and prediabetes and improves our glucose regulation. So that's another benefit that in theory would happen if we are going through periods of fasting. Now, another proposed benefit is this idea of autophagy and cellular cleanup. If we have periods where we don't have a lot of nutrients, then that's going to activate these other cellular pathways that are promoting autophagy. These are the cellular processes that cause the damaged cells and proteins and cellular parts to be recycled and repaired. So that sounds good, right? That sounds like a good thing to be promoting. The data that we have of autophagy in states of fasting or prolonged nutrient restriction is really only in animal models or in cellular models. That's because this isn't a super easy thing to measure in a human. So most of that is extrapolated from the data that we have on animals, but it sounds like a really good thing. You know, we're all about choosing products that will work with our bodies without causing harm to our bodies. That is why I want to share with you one of my favorite brands. This is a brand I use regularly and consistently in my own life and in my family, and it is Just Ingredients. From their electrolytes and probiotics to their protein and bone broth powders, every product is made with clean, simple ingredients you can actually pronounce and trust, without artificial sweeteners, no fillers, no junk, just real functional nutrition to support your energy, your gut, your hormones, and more. Our team uses these daily and recommends them often in clinic. If you're looking for products that align with your wellness goals, Just Ingredients is a great place to start. One of my favorite things about them is that I don't have to work very hard because they've already done the work. So I don't have to spend time looking at the labels and trying to find the ingredients, trying to remember what I was supposed to avoid. They just do that all for me. So I know anything that I buy from them is already screened and is something that I can trust. Use code UPLIFT for her for 10% off at justingredients.us. Now back to the show. Another reason why we may want to incorporate fasting or periods of calorie restriction in our lives is because there have been some studies, and these ones have been actually in humans, showing reduced inflammation markers and improvements in oxidative stress. Remember, oxidative stress is kind of the wear and tear on our cells and our bodies. So that sounds like a good thing. We really want to decrease our inflammation, and we want to improve our cellular repair so that we don't get aging quicker than we should, or wear and tear in our organs quicker than we should, or cancers or dementia or these other things. So if we stay in a calorie restriction for a prolonged period of time and we reduce our inflammation and improve our markers of oxidative stress, then that seems like a good thing as well in terms of disease prevention. And then the last benefit that I'm going to talk about is this idea of gut microbiome changes. There have been studies in humans which show fasting windows can alter the microbiome, which can improve production of short chain fatty acids, which are really good, and that's one of the good things that we want from our gut, and may also influence our metabolic markers and our immune system markers. Here's where the downside of all of this comes, because this sounds amazing, right? Sign me up. I will fast. I will stop eating and have all of these benefits come up. The downside is we just don't have the data to really support this well at this point. Now, before I go into the data specifically, I want to just call something out here that's really clearly a problem when we're talking about intermittent fasting and other types of calorie restriction is we don't have the data in women. A lot of this data that we have in humans is only in men. And a lot of the even anecdotal results that we have are in men. So many of you will know a guy who started doing intermittent fasting and lost a bunch of weight, right? And maybe you yourself tried it and lost your 4 pounds or your 2 pounds. And that's often what we see with weight loss in general, and a lot of the weight loss studies, is that men's bodies respond very differently than women's. Now, why do men often show these results more easily than women? A big part of it is just the way that our hormones function. So women's bodies are meant to be more sensitive to changes in the way that we eat so that we know whether it's safe to reproduce or not. Our bodies are the ones that have to carry the baby. And so if it's dangerous out there and something happens to me, the offspring is going to be affected by that. Whereas men, if they are disseminating their seed throughout the population, if they starve or if they get eaten because the environment is not safe, that doesn't really affect the offspring right then. The woman is housing the offspring. And so women's bodies are more naturally going to be sensitive to fluctuations in the environment so that we make sure we keep our bodies safe and we keep our offspring safe. Now, that's a lot of cave woman talk, but it is really what we see in hormones, is that if women calorie restrict for a period of time, does it affect their hormones? In men, there doesn't seem to be as rapid a response from their hormones in these trials of energy restriction or calorie restriction. So that's why we really need to have clear data of women versus men to say, is this a good idea or is this going to affect my hormones? Because the last thing any of us want is to have more hormonal fluctuations or to shut down our periods or to increase the risk of infertility or to bring on perimenopause and menopause sooner. So we really want to know if this is the right thing for women instead of just using the data that we have in men. Now, let me review just a few of the key studies that we have. When I'm doing this, note when these studies were done. The studies that I'm talking about are from 2020 and 2021 and 2022. Sort of the oldest studies that we have in this are really 2015, 2017. So this is pretty new stuff that we have, which is why you're going to hear me say over and over, we just don't know. One of the studies we have is from 2020, and this is called the TREAT trial. This was really looking at time-restricted eating in that 16-8, so fasting for 16 hours and eating for 8 hours. This was specifically in 116 adults who were overweight or obese. So pay attention right there, because 116 people is not a huge trial, and this was only looking at people who were obese or overweight. And in that trial, it didn't show a lot of great outcomes. It was only 3 months long. It did show a little bit of weight loss, about 1% weight loss of the total body weight, and didn't specifically show a lot of cardiometabolic improvements. So cholesterol, diabetes markers, they didn't see a lot of improvements. This was both genders, but it was a little bit short, and they didn't have any other dietary advice. So no other calorie restriction or exercise. They just said, what if you only eat for 8 hours a day? So not a huge raving endorsement of time-restricted eating in that study. Another study was done in 2021. This showed, again, an 8-hour time-restricted eating window, specifically in women with PCOS. So this was really good, but it was only for 6 weeks. So how much benefit are we going to see in 6 weeks? But these women with PCOS who were anovulatory, so not ovulating, not having regular cycles, did show improvements in body fat, improved insulin resistance, improvements in testosterone. So they showed reduction in testosterone levels and improved menstrual function. Now in perimenopause, we're talking about how we don't want testosterone levels to decrease, but in PCOS, that's one of the things that causes a lot of the ruckus in PCOS and a lot of the undesirable side effects is the elevated testosterone. So in PCOS, there showed maybe some more promise in having that time-restricted eating window. There was another study in 2022 where they matched time-restricted eating window to calorie restriction. So put you on a diet, basically. What if we just eat fewer calories in arm 1 and restricted the hours that you were eating in arm 2? And what they found were that they both worked about the same. Now, this is good and bad. This is good because if you don't want to do or are struggling with a calorie restriction and you just go into a time-restricted eating window, that may be a good idea for you. The downside is that the time-restricted eating window seems to be equivalent to the calorie restriction, meaning if you don't go into a calorie restriction during your time-restricted feed, then you're not going to see the benefits most likely. This is part of the argument that we see is how much is the calorie restriction important versus the time restriction, and probably they're the same thing. The time restriction is creating the calorie restriction. The last couple studies that I'll mention were both fairly recent. One of them was done on alternate day fasting. So again, 30 hours of fasting every other day. And this did show pretty good results. It showed improvements in metabolic markers for people who were obese or had type 2 diabetes. They also showed an increase in weight loss, and they did show improvements in visceral fat. But that study was only in men. And then the last study was also time-restricted feeding. This one, as opposed to the first study that I mentioned, did show a little bit of weight loss. It did show some improvements in fasting insulin. It showed that people could stick with it pretty well, but it still didn't show amazing improvements in cholesterol, blood pressure, and insulin resistance. Keep in mind that none of these studies have been long enough. None of these studies have been big enough. None of these studies have really explored all of the variety and the different ways that you could do this. Not to mention the context, like, was this only in obese people or was it in normal weight people? Was it only in people who were super stressed or people who weren't super stressed? Was it in people who were exercising actively or not? So there is still a lot of data here that we need to gather. One of the questions I get asked all the time is, what supplements do you recommend? Now, whether this is for daily essentials, sleep support, gut health, what to take during pregnancy, I know how overwhelming it can feel to choose the right products. I have spent hours myself combing through these brands and ingredients, trying to make sure that I can find things that I'm comfortable taking myself and that I'm comfortable recommending to my family and to my patients. I'm then able to get feedback from my patients and family to see, did these supplements actually accomplish what we were hoping that they would accomplish? And this is why I created a curated full script storefront with the brands and supplements I trust most. These are the same ones I use in my clinic and in my own home. When patients say, what do you recommend for magnesium? Or what do you recommend for fish oil? Or what do you recommend as a fiber supplement? All of these supplements are listed in this storefront. If you're curious, just visit the link in the show notes. There's also a link on our website and through our Instagram account to explore all of my favorites in one place. When you purchase through the link, you get 15% off. Now back to the show. Now let me come back to just the idea of how this may be beneficial in women. And I am going to come back to, like I mentioned, is this the right thing for you to try? And I actually do think there are some people that may benefit from it. So stay tuned. Now, in women, we really want to pay attention to the way that our brain interacts with our ovaries. There's something called the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. That means that one part of our brain talks to the other part of our brain, which speaks to our ovaries. And that axis, that communication, is really sensitive to the way that we have energy in our bodies. So if you are underfueling and running 10 miles a day, then you may notice that the periods stop, right? We see this in active athletes who are young, like gymnasts or runners who don't get their period. The reason for that is the brain says, we don't have enough calories on board. We don't have enough energy on board to fuel reproduction. We just don't have enough energy. So it shuts down reproduction for a time. And that's not what we want in our lives. We want to have our periods because the period is a vital sign that everything is in balance in our bodies, our digestive tract, our stress system, our energy system. If our periods are absent, then that's a sign that something's run amok in our energy system. So when we're talking about different types of diets, we want to know, does the period stay intact? Or when we go into that diet, does the period disappear? This is one of the main questions that comes up with intermittent fasting then, is does intermittent fasting affect our hormones adversely? Can women tolerate periods of no calories or low calories without shutting down systems in our bodies and decreasing our fertility? We already know that over time, persistent energy restriction can impact our fertility, our sex drive, our bone density, our muscle health. We know this is not something that we want. If you take a woman and you put her into a state of fasting, that can create a state of low energy availability. We know that in specific circumstances, that can cause chronic cortisol elevation. The other question we want to answer when we're talking about calorie restriction and fasting in women is it going to boost our cortisol? We talk a lot about stress, and we know that it's not great to have chronically elevated cortisol. So in a woman, if you are fasting for a prolonged period of time, does that elevate your cortisol long term? The answer is we don't know, and it probably depends. The research in women, I mentioned one study in PCOS that shows some promise. In terms of research using fasting in normal weight or underweight women, almost no data, but probably higher risk of harm in those women. If we look at premenopause and postmenopause, almost no data differentiating between the two. What we do know is that women who are postmenopausal don't have that same sensitivity to the ovaries because the ovaries are shut down. So in postmenopause, there may be more benefit to fasting than in premenopause. But again, we don't have the data to differentiate that. Certainly women who are actively trying to conceive, who are not obese or overweight, who do not have PCOS, this would be a little bit trickier to argue because we want to do everything we can in a woman who is of reproductive age to signal that she is in a safe environment. So mimicking periods of no food availability probably are not going to bode well in this group. Let's shift gears then and say, well, when is this beneficial? Why are you talking about all of this if what you're saying is just don't do it? Well, here's where we may consider doing it. If you are a woman with PCOS who is skipping periods, who has insulin resistance, who is overweight or obese, this is a time when you may consider adding in time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting. The nuance there is that if your periods come back, then you want to gently come out of that state so that you then don't cause further trouble with the reproductive hormones of then shutting them down. So you could consider it for a time and then come back out of it. If you don't have PCOS, but you still have prediabetes, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, then this may be a beneficial insulin lowering strategy for you to try. If you are a person who struggles with snacking at night, or if you chronically have late night eating and you struggle with sleep, or you struggle with your metabolic health in addition to eating late at night, then sometimes it can be helpful just to say, I'm going to be done eating after dinner. To be honest, I think you'll have a hard time finding someone who's going to say you should be eating after dinner. Most of us should do some amount of time-restricted eating where we eat during the day and we fast after dinner. But that's going to be more of an eating for 16 hours and a fasting for 8 hours, or even better, eating for 12 hours and fasting for 12 hours, rather than slamming it down into tiny little eating windows. So most of us would probably benefit from not eating after dinner. If you do an experiment and you find that you feel better eating this way, then that would be another cue that this could be a good option for you. If you are post-menopause, this might be beneficial, especially if you struggle with weight and you struggle metabolically. Next, I'm going to go through signs that you would look for in your body that this is a good thing for you and signs that it's not a good thing for you. And then lastly, I'll recap kind of what are the things that you could try, like how do we actually put this into place? So signs that it is helpful. Number one, if you feel better. So if you've employed some amount of intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating and you just feel like your energy is nice and steady through the day, you wake up, your energy is there, you're steady after lunch, you're not having that afternoon crash, you feel pretty good up until bedtime, then that's a good sign that this is a good thing for you. If you have improvement in your numbers, so fasting glucose or insulin levels, those are things that we regularly look for at our clinic at Uplift for Her. We want to see the data. We want to see what your numbers are showing us. So are you feeling better and are your numbers improving? Some of these numbers will improve as early as 6 weeks. So you can do what I call a science experiment where you say, I am going to do this religiously for 6 weeks. And then I'm going to call you, Dr. Craycroft, and I'm going to ask you to check my cholesterol. There's a chance that you would see that quickly. I think you'll have better chances of seeing it after 3 months and even better chances of seeing it if you can do it consistently for 6 months. So we can look at fasting glucose, insulin, lipid levels really quite easily to see if this is a good thing and if it's working well for you. If they're normal, then that's something that then we want to say, so do we come out of this intermittent fasting cycle? Now, another thing to be looking for if this is a good thing for you is if it helps with your sleep. A lot of people will find that if they stop eating after dinner or they stop eating a little bit earlier in the day, so maybe eating dinner at 5 instead of 8 o'clock at night, they're going to sleep better. They're not going to be snacky before bedtime. They're going to wake up feeling more refreshed. So that would be a good sign. Maybe you notice that your digestion is improved, you're pooping more regularly, you have less bloating. That's a really good sign that this is improving the microbiome. If you're noticing improvements in your cycle length, so if you've had PCOS and your periods are 45 days or 60 days apart, and now they're nudging closer and closer together, that would be really great. If you notice improvements in your sex drive or improvements in hair loss, those could be signs that this is a good thing for you. And then if you're losing weight, right? If you're losing weight because you're overweight or an unhealthy weight, then that would be really wonderful. Sometimes we look at weight through body composition, through an in-body scan or a DEXA scan where we can actually measure visceral fat. Is the visceral fat improving with these changes to your diet? Now, what are some signs that this is not a good thing for you? Number one, if you're already underweight, I would really talk to your doctor before starting this. If you're noticing cycle changes, so if you have worsening PMS even, now you may say like my periods are still really consistent and I've been doing intermittent fasting, but what about PMS? What about the actual period? Is it heavier? Is it more painful? Are you skipping ovulation? Are you noticing changes in the cervical mucus? Those would all be signs that this is too much for your body. Do you notice your mood is worsening? So I'm irritable all the time. I'm getting hangry. Like if I can fast, but I'm just miserable by the end of the fast. I'm more depressed. This is not a good thing for you if this is what your mood is doing. If you're noticing energy crashes, so halfway through the fast, you are tanking, you are feeling dizzy or passing out, heaven forbid, or just noticing that you are really sluggish, that's a sign that this is too much for you. If you notice that your sleep is disrupted, you're waking up at 2 a.m. feeling really wired and anxious or irritable, if you're noticing hair loss, if you're noticing your sex drive is worsening, other signs that you might be under fueling, these would be reasons to come off of the trial of intermittent fasting or time restricted eating. Another really important thing to watch for with this is if it's messing with your brain. So if you are noticing disordered eating patterns or that you're obsessed with food timing or that it's overall not doing good things with your relationship with food, that would be a reason to stop. I would at least go back to eating a 12-hour window and stop fasting altogether besides the overnight fast. So let me summarize some of these tips and tricks that I would put into place. So we've talked about why this might be beneficial, how it might be beneficial, what to look for. So let's just summarize if this is a good thing for you and how you would actually start doing this. Number one, all of us could try doing a 12-hour fast. So that would mean you stop eating after dinner and you start eating at breakfast time. This is going to be where we always want to start. The next step would be to say, could you grow that window a little bit? Now, here's my personal preference. I see many, many women who skip breakfast as part of intermittent fasting and then really struggle with energy. I prefer, if you're going to extend that fasting window, to extend it into the afternoon or evening instead of into the morning. So maybe you're able to eat dinner at 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. and start your fast then, but you're going to wake up and eat a really solid breakfast. There has been at least one study looking at early time restricted eating versus late time restricted eating. So do you eat breakfast and lunch and stop eating, or do you skip breakfast and eat lunch and dinner? And my preference, absolutely 100% for the vast majority of women, is going to be to eat breakfast, eat lunch, and then maybe have a small dinner, or to have a dinner a little earlier and then extend your fasting window after that. So that would be the first thing you could consider trying. Another thing you could consider trying is aiming for a once a month fast. This has to do with metabolic flexibility that I mentioned earlier. We want our bodies to be able to switch back and forth, like that hybrid car, from using glucose to using fat for energy. If you get to 8 hours of a fast and you are hangry and irritable, your body only made it 8 hours without glucose and you are like dying. That's a good sign that you need to improve your metabolic flexibility. And one of the ways we do that is by gradually nudging towards a 24-hour fast. So that doesn't mean you go out and do a 24-hour fast right away, but can you do a 24-hour fast? If you can do a 24-hour fast and you feel pretty okay during it, that doesn't mean water. So you can have water during it. If you can not eat food for 24 hours and you feel okay, then that's a good sign that your body is shifting back and forth between glucose and fat burning. If you can only make it 8 hours and then you want to, eat your arm, then that would be a good sign that we need to gradually extend that fasting window. So I would say, see how long you can comfortably fast for, and then the next month you do a little bit longer, and then the next month you do a little bit longer. So maybe it takes you 6 months to get to a 24-hour fast, and that's fine. We don't need to stress the body, but the body really should be okay with going without food once a month. If you can do that, then you know that that metabolic flexibility is good. Then keep doing that once a month. Doing it more than once a month, some people have suggested, but I don't think we know. We just don't have the data. So that's where I would say if you're in the menstruating age group or if you're trying to get pregnant, I would not really push your luck there. But if you are perimenopausal or menopausal, if you're overweight, obese, then that could be something that maybe you try a 24-hour fast, maybe twice a month. But I really wouldn't be pushing for a 24-hour fast longer than that, or it's going to add a stress and strain to the body, and that's not what we want to do. Another consideration is to treat this as a lifestyle. You may see benefits after 6 weeks, maybe 12 weeks, but really we're looking for longer benefits than that. We really want to see that you can do this for 6 months or 12 months. So when you're doing this, I wouldn't go too extreme. I would try to do this in a way that feels sustainable for you so that you can allow your body to shift with it over time. Another tip is to look at the context here. Are you super stressed already? Are you super stressing your body? Are you running a bunch? Are you training for a marathon? Are you doing HIIT classes 5 days a week? If you're already stressing the body a fair bit, then adding the stress of fasting may not go so well. So when we're thinking about fasting, I like to know that before the fasting window, you were well nourished. That means you had enough protein, enough fiber, enough healthy fats, enough minerals like sodium and potassium, calcium, that you have enough micronutrients. If you are under fueling in a window and then you fast, that doesn't add up to success, right? We want to show our bodies that we are so well nourished that we can afford to have a baby, that we can afford to go 24 hours without food and not stress our system, that we can support repair in the body. You want to know where your context is. If you're super, super stressed psychologically, then adding fasting probably isn't the right time for you. That's not the right time for you to do that just yet. I would focus on getting your stress under control. If you're training for something, then you want to make sure that you're focused more on fuel than on fasting. If you're not training specifically for something, you're not doing really intense exercise, then adding in a little bit of time-restricted eating or fasting from time to time, you may see those gains without overstressing the body. Now, let me just lastly, as I wrap up here, what are some myths that we see? One of the myths is you have to fast for 30 hours or 36 hours to see that autophagy. The fact is we don't know because that's all in animal models. So any amount of fasting may have benefits. Many women may get those benefits at 12 to 14 hours. The prolonged fasts, we just don't know, so I wouldn't push your luck too much. Another myth is that fasting automatically triggers autophagy and longevity, and it's going to be better for everyone. We don't know, and especially for women, we don't know. So I would be careful in introducing these habits into your life. On the flip side of that, and here's where the nuance comes, it might be beneficial for you. So if you are trying to get pregnant, probably not the right time unless you're obese or overweight or you have PCOS. If you're not trying to get pregnant and you're trying to really boost energy and you have insulin resistance, then it may be a good thing for you. But you're going to have to fuel and sleep and not over-exercise on the flip side of adding in a little bit of fasting. Another myth is fasting is equally safe for men and women. Obviously, we don't know that. Then another myth is fasting is good for you and it's not going to trigger cortisol. That's just not true. Undereating is going to trigger cortisol, and it will often slow down your metabolic gain so that you're gaining weight or that you're not losing weight or you're worsening your metabolic markers. So I realize this can be confusing. I hope this has hopefully added a little bit of clarity. I think it's a really interesting tool. I think we should keep studying it. I think we should keep talking about it. I want you to understand if you're in that camp where this might be more beneficial of looking for longevity, if you have metabolic syndrome, if you have PCOS, if you are overweight or obese, or you have high cholesterol or high blood pressure, this may be useful. And I hope I've explained well enough some little ways that you can try that, and then those symptoms that you can watch for to say, this is working well for me, or this is not working well for me. More often than not, when women come into my clinic, I am telling them to add back breakfast. So I don't like the intermittent fasting at breakfast, but can you eat a little bit less towards the end of the day? Maybe adding in a 24-hour fast, maybe adding in experimenting with some other fasting. Do it gently and understand when your body needs a break from it and when you need to actually improve your fueling to really get those balanced gains in life. So one thing I'm quite sure of is I have done a really good job of explaining how complex this subject is. Maybe you're more confused than you started, but I think it at least starts to unpack why there's so many mixed messages around this idea of intermittent fasting. And I hope you'll let me know if this is helpful. Let me know if you try it out and you get wins, or you try it out and you see some downsides. This is always helpful to kind of crowdsource for women of how do we really start to understand the women's body better. And I hope we continue to get more data on this subject as well. So I'd love to hear from you. If you like this episode or other episodes like it, let me know. Shoot me a message on Instagram or leave a message on YouTube that we can know exactly how we can most help you. And with that, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. We are grateful for the incredible support from our sponsors and to all of you listening. We couldn't do this without you. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing on your favorite platform. You can find us on our website, upliftforher.com, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you love to listen. And if you found value here today, please share this episode with someone who would benefit from it. Leave us a comment or give us a review. It really helps us reach more listeners like you. Thank you for being part of our community. Stay tuned for our next episode. Lastly, this information is for educational purposes only and not intended to be medical advice.